Good morning and welcome to day 3 of the second session of the Affordability and Student Loans Committee negotiated rulemaking process. My name is Emil Tatanchi and I'll be facilitating this morning. Before we dive into substantive discussion, just want to take a roll call of everyone that's here. I will start with Heather Perfetti and Michael McComas, who are primary and alternates for accrediting agencies.
Good morning, everyone. Heather Perfetti here.
Good morning, Michael McComas.
Next, I'd like to welcome Dixie Samaniego and Greg Norwood, who are the primary and alternate negotiators for dependent students.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Greg Norwood.
I would like to welcome Rajiv Darolia, who is an advisor on economic and/or higher education policy analysis and higher education data.
Good morning.
I'd like to welcome Jay O'Connell and Will Schaffner, who are the primary and alternate negotiators for federal family education loan lenders and/or guarantee agencies.
Morning, Jay O'Connell.
Is Will Schaffner present?
I'm having a conversation by myself. Sorry, I'm on mute. Hi, everyone. I need more coffee.
Fair enough. Welcome. Alyssa Dobson and Daniel Barkowitz, the alternate, and I apologize, I reverse those, the alternate and primary for financial aid administrators at post-secondary institutions.
Morning, everyone. Daniel Barkowitz here.
Good morning, Alyssa Dobson.
Marjorie Doreen Williams and Rachel Feldman, the primary and alternate negotiators for 4-year public institutions of higher education.
Good morning, everyone. Dr. Dorme Williams here.
Rachel Feldman present. Okay. Michaela Martin and Stanley Andres, the primary and alternate negotiators for independent students.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here with you.
Bethany Lilly and John Whitelaw, primary and alternate negotiators for individuals with disabilities or groups representing them.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning, all.
Persis Yu and Joshua Rovinger, primary and alternate negotiators for legal assistance organizations that represent students and/or borrowers.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, everyone.
Noelia Gonzalez, alternate for minority serving institutions.
Good morning, everybody.
Misty Sabuna and Terrence McTeer, primary and alternate negotiators for private nonprofit institutions of higher education.
Good morning.
Morning, Dr. McTeer here.
Jessica Berry and Carol Colvin, primary and alternate negotiators for proprietary institutions.
Good morning, everyone. Jessica Berry here.
Good morning.
Heather Jarvis, advisor on qualifying employers on the topic of public service loan forgiveness.
Good morning, Emil. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Joseph Sanders and Eric Apar, primary and alternate negotiators for state attorneys general.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, everyone.
David Tanberg and Suzanne Martindale, primary and alternate negotiators for state higher education executive officers, state authorizing agencies, and/or state regulators of institutions of higher education and/or loan servicers.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Barry O'Brien Losi and Jen Cardenas, and I'm being deliberate about Jen, primary and alternate negotiators for student loan borrowers.
Good morning, everyone.
Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone.
Bobby Ayala and Christina Tangalakis, two-year primary and alternate negotiators for two-year public institutions of higher education.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Justin Hauschild and Emily DeVito, primary and alternate negotiators for U.S. military service members, veterans, or groups representing them.
Morning.
Good morning.
And also Jennifer Hong of the Department of Education.
Good morning, welcome back.
Present here for the Department of Education, Office of General Counsel this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Todd Davis, back again. Thank you.
Excellent. Did I miss anyone? Excellent. Okay, well, let's get rolling with the program today. Before we jump into borrower defense, which is our next big topic to discuss, I understand Jennifer from the department has a few general remarks.
Good morning, everybody. Just wanted to flag, today is Wednesday. We're midway through session 2 and through the negotiations. We have a lot on our agenda, as you all know, and a lot to discuss. Really appreciate the discussions thus far. It sounds like, just to review, I want to backtrack because I'm growing a little bit concerned about where we are on different issues. It sounds like interest capitalization is the one issue where we are all in consensus under the current proposal. So I'm pleased about that. We're pleased about that. I realize Jay is still interested in the FEL language before being able to vote on the discharge issues. However, I felt like TPD was an encouraging discussion. We're going to go back and we're going to review before the end of the week again, because I think it bears repeating what the sticking points are for some of these issues. And as I mentioned before, you know, going back on the 5 years with TPD, we're taking that under consideration. I believe that was the main issue for total permanent and disability discharge. So I think that is in a good place as well. With regard to closed school, I'm a little concerned about where some of the committee is with regard to re-enrollment, and then the institutional representatives in terms of the definition. I don't know if that's something that we can carve out some time for you all to discuss and find a meeting place. We are bound by the master calendar. The master calendar stipulated in the Higher Education Act that we've got to publish the outcome of these rules if we reach consensus by November 1st the following year. So I just want to remind people that this is, our goal here is consensus. We want to have everybody on board. We're here in good faith. But if we don't reach consensus, then the department will publish, whatever rule or policy direction that we see fit. So we really want to remind folks about the goal of consensus. It is Wednesday in session 2, so as much as we can remedy kind of sticking points, articulate those sticking points so that we can be clear on where we are with these things, I think that would be very fruitful going forward. And I thank you all for your continued commitment to this process.
Thank you, Jennifer. I see a couple of hands. Before doing so, I'd like to recognize that Josh is present for legal aid and that Greg is present for dependent students. If there are any other folks who don't intend to be at the main table right now that still have their cameras on, please turn off your cameras at this time. All right, thank you. David.
Yeah, appreciate those points by Jennifer. We are working under fewer hours than typically are operated under with a negotiated rulemaking. And the last negotiated rulemaking that I participated in, which was the last one before this one, we actually added an hour per day and actually added days in order to reach consensus. And so none of us want to spend any more time on Zoom than we have to, but it may necessitate us going to perhaps 5 Eastern time if that worked for folks. I know that people out east may have obligations to pick up kids, etc. But I wonder about adding, start going to 5 moving forward, or perhaps even adding a day or two, or keep open the option of adding a day or two on the back end if we reach that point. But it sure does seem like we have short days, even though they also feel long at the same time. But we have 5 hours each day, which actually for a negotiated rulemaking is not much time. So just wanted to put that on the table of going till 5 each day, Eastern time.
Okay. Daniel.
Thank you. In response to Jennifer, and again, thank you, and I appreciate the fair and accurate representation of the desire to move to consensus. It would be helpful. I had asked yesterday if Raj could present some data on closed schools, and I wonder if we have or can make time today, if Raj is ready with those data. Again, I think that would be helpful to give us the context. So we have a sense of how big of an issue this is and where this takes place. Because again, my sense is this is a much larger issue than I think we understand.
I understand that Raj will have something to share at some point today, most likely the afternoon. Bethany.
Jessica was actually ahead of me. I'm not sure why she bumped over.
I don't know why either. Jessica, please proceed. And thank you, Bethany, for that.
Really
Yeah,
quickly,
thanks, Bethany.
sorry, Jessica, if you put your hand up and then take it down and then put it back up, it will move you to the end of the line. So I just want to know that folks move themselves when their hands go up and down. So we'll continue to call on the first person. So if you do inadvertently lower your hand, please put it right back up and we'll get to you in that sequence list.
Yeah, which is exactly what I did. So thank you, and thank you, Bethany. Jennifer, I just wanted to ask, I know there was a lot of support for the proposal that we put forth on closed school discharge, but I know you said the department had some concerns with it. Is there any way we could get feedback, even like a red line document with feedback on it? I think that would help us come to consensus.
That's why I tried to address it as succinctly as I could. Unfortunately, and you all know that you submitted more proposals yesterday that we appreciate. I've urged you to do so, and getting the proposed language allows us to review that more expeditiously. We can't provide written feedback to you guys on every single proposal. We can discuss them here at the table. And just in general, in terms of the definition, we appreciate that discussion and what you're trying to address in terms of mergers and those issues. But in general, the idea here and the policy direction from the department is to cast a net to capture students and address the proprietary, the predatory actions of some of the institutions with regard to closed school discharge. And we have, that being said, to the extent possible, we've tried to address in the proposed language through comments, verbally, through quick emails, any issues that you have with your proposals, but we can't do a red line back to each and every proposal. We just don't have that bandwidth.
Can I just comment on that real quick? I totally understand that. I just think there are some situations that we presented that are not coming from a predatory place, that I think where discharges are being applied, that is just not the department's intent. So I hope when we're talking about closed school discharge next time, and maybe if we see this data too that Daniel's talking about, maybe we can continue that conversation just a little bit further.
Nor was I suggesting, I was suggesting that we were trying to address the predatory practices through the additions that we made after session 1.
Thanks. See a few more hands up. We'll welcome those comments. Obviously, we want to get into borrower defense, but go ahead, Bethany.
I'll be very brief. I appreciate the department's very clear focus on getting us to consensus, but I also want to just acknowledge that I think there are going to be things we're not going to reach consensus on. I think there are just large gaps between perspectives. And so I appreciate the reminder that that is our goal and that is something that we have agreed to in the protocols, but that I think sometimes we just end up at that point where we're not going to be able to get there. And I want to acknowledge that as part of this discussion, because I don't think that's a bad thing. I think people are just going to have different perspectives.
If I could just quickly respond to that, thank you, Bethany, and we realize that that's always a possibility. I would just ask you to deeply contemplate whether the current regulations as written is something that you would prefer than in the alternative, because that is the alternative, are the current regulations. So we're trying to improve upon them. So that is really the issue that I would like for you to consider when you look through these regulations, whether they are an improvement and whether you can, kind of move the thumb toward the middle, or whether you prefer the current regs as written. So that's the standard that we're looking at right now.
Josh.
So I initially was just coming on here to voice support for adding time if needed, because I do think the discussions have been fruitful. But I do also want to respond to 2 points that have just been made. One, I actually respectfully disagree with the department's framing of what we're doing here. The undersecretary and secretary and president have made very clear commitments to borrowers. And so I don't think the question we're faced here is current regulations, many of which were entirely decimated by the prior administration, and what the department has put forward. I think the question we need to be asking when we're evaluating these regulations is, do these meet the commitments that the secretary and the president and the undersecretary have made to borrowers and students? And I think that's where a lot of the pushback that's coming towards the department's positions is anchored. I also just want to address Jessica's comment and that proposal. Just to clarify the record.
Excuse me 1 second, Josh. Someone has unmuted themselves and we can hear them, which means we can't hear you clearly. Can everyone ensure that they are muted if they're not currently speaking? Thank you. Josh, proceed.
Sure. So while those specific proposals may not be coming from a predatory place, I think from the legal aid constituency, they're, as written, a non-starter, and so I don't think they had significant consensus, as was alluded to.
I see a few more hands up. Daniel.
Thank you. I wanted to circle back to something that Dixie, I believe it was Dixie, had said yesterday or asked yesterday about the question of, and again, going back to closed school, the question of liability. In re-reviewing the document last night, I didn't see anything in the closed school discharge section about institutional liability. Dixie had asked the question about whether this was born out of a concern for institutional liability, and it is in part for me. Again, if a campus of an institution shuts down, which I think we're going to find happens often, not the entire institution, the question of liability becomes germane. So I don't know, Jennifer, if there's any ability to provide any context on that, or if I'm just missing this. It doesn't appear in the regulatory proposal that was provided by the department. So I'm not sure if it's in a different subsection or if there's a different place where institutional liability is mentioned as part of closed school discharge. So that would be an open question for me.
You could note that in the chat, that would be great, Daniel. Justin.
Yeah, I just, I also understand what the department is getting at here in terms of timeline and improvement in the regulations, but I also have to disagree with the framing, you know, that in an improvement on currently deficient regulations is somehow adequate or sufficient. I mean, I think if we're going to, it's not the appropriate framing to be looking at deficient regulations and saying that simply approving them is good enough. Just improving bad regulations isn't enough, and we should be looking to see, you know, how we can make them as sufficient as possible for students. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, all I ask as facilitator is, you know, this means, you know, you're there and you like it. Here is you can live with it. Just make sure that this accurately matches where you're at, if that's fair. Okay, David.
Yeah, I would just like to call the question on adding an hour to each of our days. If we could discuss it or just skip straight to a vote.
Jennifer, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here. Thank you, David, for the suggestion. Please know that my comments are in the context of we're doing this for the first time virtually. I think it's gone very well. We extended it to, you know, rulemaking is usually 3 days when we do it live. We extended it to 5 days purposefully and made the days a little bit shorter because there's a real Zoom fatigue or virtual meeting fatigue that's very real. And I think the facilitators have had a lot of experience with this. So it becomes, stringing 20 hours together, I think becomes counterproductive at some point. But more than that, we have real limitations in terms of our technology and our commitments in terms of the people that are making this possible. So we would not be able to add time. And I don't want to belabor this discussion anymore. My point was simply, you know, great job, guys. Thank you. And like just a reminder, let's remember what the end goal is here, and that we are dealing with a limited time frame. That's the whole pressure of negotiated rulemaking, whether it's live, whether it's virtual. So to the extent that we can caucus or do whatever we need to do to kind of build some bridges on these sticking points before the end of the week, that would be really great.
Jessica, and then I'm going to call myself.
This will be quick, just to Josh's comment. I don't want to overrepresent the support for that proposal. I just got excited about some support, so just wanted to say that.
So folks, thanks so much for the comments. I'm sure you can see as in terms of the facilitators and what we're trying to help the parties you know, accomplish is really zeroing in on where those gaps are. Anything you can do to help us with that is appreciated in your comments. Again, solution-oriented comments, you know, specific changes are ideal at this stage. So with that, keeping that mindset in our minds, if we could move to borrower defense. And with that, Jennifer, I'll ask you to tee that up for us.
Great, thank you, Emil. I believe Vanessa's on. If she could cue, again, just, there's 3 borrower defense to repayment documents. The one has a proposed language, the lengthy one has a proposed language for our proposal. There is a cross-reference to another set of regulations under our general provisions section that has to deal with an existing definition of misrepresentation that we will be cross-referencing. But first, we will begin with the proposed language on borrower defense to repayment. Yesterday, I went through the general title, so you can see from the titles the different processes that we're proposing, and we'll go through each one of them. So, right, this is the applicability. We started getting into that. I believe Josh put some language forward to ensure that we're clear in terms of the new subpart being applicable to all loans pending before the Secretary, as well as applications received on or after July 1st, 2023, which is when we're aiming to effectuate these regulations. So we can just start in on page 4. That is where we left off. The black, all this is new proposed language again, and definitions. So we have definitions under the general subpart. We did flag some areas where we've had some questions if we pulled stuff in from 2016. The first one that you'll see on the middle of page 4, subparagraph 5, is the term for provision of educational services. And I'll just read the definition aloud. It means the educational resources provided by the institution that are required by an accrediting agency or state licensing or authorizing agency for the completion of the student's educational program. And so we just wanted to tee that up to you guys. It's from 2016. Are there any comments on that? And I see Joe's hand up.
Joe, please proceed.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I'm going back to look at this. On the document that's borrower defense proposal. Sorry, I don't know what it's called. The first borrower defense document, which has language that I sent you guys. On the violation of state law section, it talks about the provision of educational services. So I can hold these comments until we get to that state law section, but in caucusing with my constituency, I did have people raise some concerns about the scope of provision of educational services as it relates to a state law claim on borrower defense to repayment. Very brief overview. The concern was that there have been some very high profile cases of sexual harassment and sexual abuse of students at play, for example, the sports program cases like Michigan State or Penn State, football and gymnastics programs. And so my constituency raised the concern, does provision of educational services cover things such as participating in a sports program or, using the pool at the campus gym, situations where students could come to sexual harm and then not feel safe at the school and so have to withdraw. So that I think applies to this definition and something that we just asked the department to consider.
Thank you for that, Joe. And we'll also, are there any other comments on the definition? We can proceed, and we're going to be pulling down your document shortly to discuss the other components of what constitutes a claim under the proposed federal standard. Okay, so moving along on page 4. Okay, under the general definitions, school and institution can be used interchangeably. That's existing language. Okay, so paragraph B is a federal standard for borrower defense applications. Again, we've repeated here that it's not based on disbursement, but receipt on or after July 1st, 2023, or applications pending before the Secretary. This also includes a direct loan or other federal student loan that could be consolidated into a federal direct consolidation loan, may assert a defense to repayment under this subpart. And we've identified 5 bases for a claim: misrepresentation, omission of fact, breach of contract, aggressive deceptive recruitment tactics, judgment against the school, or the department's adverse action against the school. So moving on to page 5, we are going to pull up the misrep documentation in just a moment, but before we do that, while we're on the discussion about educational services, there is a comment under paragraph 3 on page 5, which comes again from 2016, and whether this should be tied to the provision of education services or not. And that is the institution that the borrower received the direct loan or other federal student loan that could be consolidated into the federal direct consolidation loan program to attend failed to perform its obligations under the terms of a contract with a student. So we'll tee that up for you to kind of chew on. In the meantime, I would like to use this time to kind of get into the misrepresentation discussion. And if we could cue that document now, Vanessa, that is subpart F, proposed language. So what we're proposing under misrep, you see from the bottom of page 4 to page 5, in the main text, it makes a cross-reference to made a misrepresentation as defined in 34 CFR Part 668, subpart F, in connection with the borrower's decision to attend or to continue attending the institution. And this is subpart F, existing language, and you'll see the red lines are additions that we would like to make. So if we scroll down here, yeah, if you could just scroll down to the first red line here. This is the definition of misrep. We're also including here omissions of fact as defined under section 668.75. We've added some language under 668.72 regarding the nature of educational program or institution, and adding the clause which may be included in the institution's marketing materials, website, or communications to students. Any misrep pertaining to those issues. Again, the black text is existing language. B1, the general or specific transferability of courses, course credits. We've clarified that language. Under 2, acceptance of credits earned through prior work at another institution toward the educational program at the institution. We can keep scrolling down. Size, location, facilities, or institutionally provided equipment, books, or supplies. down. Yeah, and then there's a deletion there, and I think it's because we captured that elsewhere. And then the second deletion we've captured below, some renumbering on the headings, and then a new MNO. And again, some of these are additions from above, but let me just read those aloud to summarize. Actual institutional selectivity rates, rankings, or student admission profiles, if they're materially different from those included in the institution's marketing materials. And a representation regarding tax status of the institution that's different from the tax status as determined by the secretary for purposes of administering Title IV HA programs. O, specialized programmatic or institutional certifications, accreditation, or approvals that were not actually obtained, or that the institution fails to remove from marketing materials, websites, or other communication. P, assistance that will be provided in securing required externship or the existence of contracts with specific externship sites. And again, that is a new element that we would like to seek additional feedback on. Let's scroll down. I see your hand, Josh. Let me just get through this piece. Disclosures under those areas that are cross-referenced. And then, well, let's pause there because I see Josh's hands up, so it's a lot. And David.
Josh, you're on mute.
Yep, there we go. Thanks. So I'll just start off by saying I think there's a lot of good stuff in here that the department has put forward, and we're generally supportive of these changes to the misrepresentation section in 668. My question, though, actually relates to subsection B in 685-401, and I'm interested in hearing from the department whether it's a policy choice or whether the department feels that there's a legal requirement for it to limit individuals who have a balance due to apply for borrower defense at any time. I don't know, Jennifer, if you can answer that for me.
Well, this is, the borrower defense regulations are with regard to discharges of loans, right? So if there's no loans outstanding, there's no claim to be brought.
But isn't one of the remedies that the department can offer a refund of monies paid? And if that's the case, isn't a borrower who has paid off all of their loans but was defrauded entitled to that money back under the borrower defense regulations? And so I guess that's where I struggle. I don't, if it's a policy choice, then I would urge Ed to reconsider that choice because those borrowers would have a valid borrower defense claim and be entitled to their money back. If it's a legal restriction, I would be interested in hearing what the restriction is.
Thanks. We'll get back, Josh.
I see Todd has come off mute. Todd, do you have a response?
Yeah, Josh, I feel like we may have to circle back as far as fleshing this out a little more, but I think it's safe to say we have taken the position and that it is a legal restriction and that, this references outstanding money owed and that you have to have, a dollar in and out. This, specifically relates to loans and that you have to have some kind of outstanding direct loan balance. That's been consistent with our position, about in past times consolidating fell into a direct loan, program so that we can get to this section of regulation. But if you'd like us to, flesh that out a little more, I understand, and we can circle back on that. Just to clear that up, that was a legal position, not a policy choice in terms of Ed's, current policy team.
Understand. Yeah, no, it'd be great if Ed could flesh that out a little bit. Thank you.
David.
Within the existing text or the red lines, when we're discussing misrepresentation, is job placement rates included among the items that could be that considered misrepresentation. I didn't see it, so I'm thinking not, but that can be a more significant factor than some of the other admissions factors that are included in the list. I guess I'm saying if it's not included, I would like to see job placements rates included among the items around misrepresentation.
Thank you, David. Joe.
This is kind of a baseline question, but are the enumerated misrepresentations the only misrepresentations that can be considered, or is this a non-exhaustive list? So if we're looking at 668.72, it's got all the, this kind of gets at David's comment, right? Do we have to list job placement rates for that to be considered a misrep?
No, but to David's point, we're going to get to it on page 5. There we have captured job placement rates there, but it is not meant to be. It's what does it say? It says not limited. Okay, which may be included. The point is, it's not exhaustive. These are just examples that we're providing here.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Justin.
Yeah, and I think maybe I'll just limit my comments, recognizing that this is a non-exhaustive list. We'd like to see a few other things included, particularly when it comes to non-traditional credits earned and representations made by institutions in that regard, or accommodations available to folks who have physical or mental health issues. But we'll just make some suggestions, understanding that this is non-exhaustive, and just provide our general support for what's going on in this area. Thank you.
Yeah, please place those suggestions in the chat. Jessica.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is the right time to ask this question or not, but so I see that there's a definition of substantial representation, and that the student had to rely upon the misrepresentation or be harmed by it. Is that the basis of the borrower defense, of an approved borrower defense claim is substantial, or is it just misrepresentation? Because I think when you remove substantial, then you can get kind of back into that mistake standard of an inadvertent mistake. And I'm just not clear about it. So maybe someone can help me with that.
Thank you, Jessica. The cross-reference here is to cross-reference the misrepresentation definition generally.
Joe.
Yeah, so to get back to Jessica's question, is reliance required here?
So no, because we're not relying on the substantial misrep definition, just misrepresentation.
Okay. If for the record, reliance is not an element of Illinois Consumer Fraud Act. I think Massachusetts and other states have the same standards. So we don't think reliance needs to be in there. It wouldn't be required under state law claim. We don't think it should be required here either.
Helpful, thank you. I can go ahead and proceed to 668.73 on page 4. Unless I see Heather's hand up, if you had a comment on what we just talked about, Heather.
Thank you, Jennifer. It was really relating to the provision on tax status. I think I understand what you're trying to convey. I just wondered if there was some clarity that could be offered there, and certainly happy to post it in the chat. But I think that IRS tax status is trying to be distinguished from the department's status that it uses for Title IV access. Is that right?
That's exactly right. As you know, that we review changes of ownership, and it's a different type of review, nature of review that IRS does. So the standard here is representing your tax status as understood by the department.
Shall we proceed with the share screen?
Thank you. Some additions to page 4, nature of financial charges or financial assistance. On D, we've added some language regarding to pay the cost of attendance at the institution, to include part-time employment, housing, transportation assistance. There's a new G, the amount, method, or timing of payment of tuition and fees that the student would be charged for the program. And this is relevant to what was just raised regarding placement rates, employability of graduates. This is the next section under 66874. There's a comment on the bottom of page 4 regarding the incorporation of that element, which is actual licensure passage rates if they are materially lower than those included in the institution's marketing materials, website, or other communications made to the student. And then this is followed up by all the text on page 5. We're really interested in getting your input on these, whether this language will address known examples of job placement rate manipulation, and how it will interact with existing rules for placement rates that accreditors and or states may use. So certainly interested in hearing from state AGs and Heather as well. If I could just go over some of these, I think it bears reading aloud. Actual employment rates, if they're materially lower than those included in the institution's marketing materials, website communications. Actual rates that are calculated in a manner that is inconsistent with a calculation formula established by an accreditor, licensed body, or the institution, or actual rates that the institution does not disclose are inflated by means such as, and you see some A through D examples there, whether that's including individuals in an employment rate calculation who are not bona fide employees, such as those individuals placed on a one-day job fair, an internship, externship, or employment subsidized by the institution. B, including students in employment rate calculation who are employed in the field prior to graduation. C, excluding students from an employment rate calculation due to the difficulty of placing that student. Or D, excluding non-respondents to a survey for calculating an employment rate. And we ask that, the institution furnish these documentation, other information used to calculate the institution's employment rate calculations. So we can sit on this if you want to stew on it. I see his hands raised, so I'm going to go on mute.
I was on mute too. Misty.
Thanks. So I do, at least from my perspective in scenarios I've seen, think that this touches on, going through, you can actually remember instances where all of these things happened. And so I think it's really important to include these for the intent. The thing I want to bring up, and I don't know that it's necessarily regulatory changes, maybe it's a dear colleague letter that comes out after, is the idea is we want schools to disclose this kind of information, but it's kind of difficult. So like on employment rates, there's not really a standard that schools can measure apples to apples. So if there was some kind of definition on how you should measure your employment rates, I think that would help for students who are comparing. And then on, let's see, on B, including students' employment rate calculations who are employed in the field prior to graduation. I think this is important and we need to measure this, but from the school's perspective, I don't know how we would do that. Would we survey students before graduation and track that? So it's more just in the technicality of how schools could actually go about doing this in a consistent way.
Joe?
Thanks. I'll be brief here. There's a lot that could be said, but I think the 2 points I want to make. One, this section, upon request, the institution must furnish the secretary documentation and other information used to calculate the employment rate calculations. That's really important because it's hard to capture all the different ways that a job placement rate could be manipulated or calculated. And so providing the backup information is really important. The department did that in their DeVry investigation, and I think that requiring that in that instance led to a really good outcome. Second point I would make is the best resource from the state attorney general's side that we have in terms of what to look at for job placement rates is probably the multi-state consent judgment with Education Management Corporation. There were significant allegations of job placement rate manipulation in that case, and we negotiated a set of terms with the operator of the schools that the department could look at in terms of an evidence-based investigation of these issues. And I'm searching for a link right now, and I'll throw that a link to that consent judgment in the chat.
Thank you. Daniel.
Thanks, Emil. So I have two thoughts. The first is just a language question, and I believe number two, the way it reads, needs to be clarified. So the way I interpret Romanet 2, it says actual rates the institution does not disclose are inflated, which means that the rates not disclosed are inflated by those means. I think the intention of the department is the opposite. So actual rates that are disclosed are inflated by things that are actual rates are inflated by the following things not disclosed. So it's just a language construction question. I think the intention is reversed. In general, I have no issue with this. I think Misty raises a really interesting point and valid one on sub B. And I would give a couple of examples for the department to consider. For example, if I am employed, I'm thinking about my local economy in a theme park local to where I live, and I come into a program on hospitality, and I graduate from that program and get a more advanced job in that theme park. By definition, I therefore have included my knowledge and grown my employability, but I would have to be excluded from employment rate. So I would struggle a bit with that because again, it's not necessarily the employability in the field. It may be the skills are developing me for advancement in that field. I think the way this is written, this also, again, sub B, also provides disincentive for institutions to assist in externships and other programs that may lead to part-time employment prior to graduation. So at my institution, most of our students are part-time. It is likely that during their tenure, they will begin to find placement in employees in the field that could in fact lead to future opportunities, and we don't want to disincentivize that, and we don't want to penalize the school for encouraging students to explore the field prior to graduation. So again, I have some significant concerns about that sub B, and thank you to Misty for highlighting that because I missed it on my first review.
Thank you for your comment, Daniel. Real quickly, I just want to point out that this is that's definitely not the intent of this section. And remember, this is applying to graduates. So I mean, with the idea that those internships and externship placements would lead to meaningful full-time work for the graduate.
Right, but I guess, Jen, my feedback is that sometimes you're placed in an internship, say in your sophomore year, that leads you to part-time employment in your junior year. And by the time you graduate, you've already begun work in the field. That is not an internship or an externship. And by this definition, once I graduate, I would be, I'd have to be excluded from that consideration. So, the concept of prior to graduation is problematic. And it doesn't address my first point about further knowledge development in the field.
Point taken, thank you.
Thanks. I do want to know that Michael is now at the table on behalf of accrediting agencies. Michael, please.
Thanks. Nobody can pronounce that word really. So just to echo and add on from a practical component what Daniel was just talking about and that Misty brought up as well. So for my agency, there sub B about including students in the employment rate calculation who were employed in the field prior to graduation. Yes, to Daniel's point, oftentimes students will obtain employment in the field that stems from either an internship or externship, or that they sought out and were able to get on their own. An HVAC technician who halfway through their program starts working as a helper part-time, before they get the full-time gig after graduation is an example of that. But we have guidelines and with my agency for employment classification, who can be classified as employed as part of our reporting mechanism. And one of the areas is career advancement. And so what we require from institutions in order to count students as employed who were already employed is that they were able to maintain the employment position due to the training provided by the school, because maybe technical elements of the position changed and they needed to get additional training, or that the student would be able to attest that from both the employer or the graduate that the training supported the graduate's ability to be eligible or qualified for advancement due to the training provided by the school. So we have those two carve-outs of what we call career advancement, and those are very important elements of many programs that are offered, particularly in vocational fields. So I just offer that as probably being somewhat problematic to just a blanket. You can't count anybody that was employed prior to graduation. I get what you're trying to do there, but what happens more predominantly are these types of career advancement positions.
This discussion is helpful. I'm just wondering if that's easily remedied by qualifying that it's employment that is unrelated to their program of study. That's really what we're talking about.
Well, if that's the case, then that would be a super useful clarification. I thought that what was intended here in reading it was that you were saying, we've seen predatory practice where a student was employed as a medical assistant, and they came out of graduation and they were still employed as a medical assistant. They didn't advance, they didn't get any gainful employment because of that. But if it's no, you cannot count somebody in employment classification who was employed in an unrelated field, get the training, and then still have that same job and count them. If that's the intent, then that clarification would be very useful.
I think we certainly want to grab that population that you described, Michael. And if either Michael or Daniel have any suggested language to send regarding the career advancement piece, that would be useful for us.
I'll post the my agency's guidelines for employment classification, in the chat, and you'll see in there the specific language that we use. Would that be helpful?
Thanks. Jessica.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Michael and Daniel on a lot of those points. I went through this with our career services director too, and he had some concern about internships being included because he's seeing that, especially our highest level employers, our most exclusive employers, a lot of them are starting almost every employment, at least at the entry level, with an internship. And sometimes we have a really short window to place the graduate. And so he would hate to see for us to start shying students away from those internship opportunities when we have that short window, because sometimes those lead to the best employment opportunities. So just something to think about.
David.
Just a point of clarification, if using the internship example, would those students, under the red line text that we're reading now, would those students be excluded from both the numerator and the denominator? Or are they just excluded from the count of employed students? Because that would make a big difference as to the incentives, right? If they count against the school, I could see an incentive being put there, but if they're not counted at all, then it wouldn't be the same kind of incentive that Jessica is highlighting.
Michael.
Well, just to David's question, that would not be an allowance that most accreditors would have. So you don't get to pick and choose which graduates you report on. There are some exclusions, but one of those that my agency doesn't include students that were employed before. So that's the only way you can take them out, as from both the numerator and the denominator. Otherwise, we're counting all graduates. Of that number, how many are employed utilizing the guidelines for employment classification.
And that was my assumption also. And I think that's the way most state agencies would calculate it. It wouldn't be an exclusion.
Josh?
Thanks. I guess I'm a little confused by this discussion, just because, I mean, doesn't this provision only come into play if there are misrepresentations regarding what the institution is doing here? So if, let's say if an institution puts forward an employment, job placement rate and says, this includes individuals who are placed in an internship or individuals who were employed in the field prior to graduation, I mean, that wouldn't constitute, I don't think, a misrepresentation if the institution's being honest about it on the front end. Though if I'm incorrect about that, that would be helpful to know.
Josh, thank you. You're absolutely right. The qualifier preceding this section is misrepresentation regarding the employability of an eligible institution's graduates includes, but is not limited to false, erroneous, or misleading statements concerning everything under that section.
Daniel, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to respond to Josh. I think this is my question about the Romanet. And again, Jen, thank you for teaching me the word Romanet. But the Romanet too, I don't understand the English construction of that clause. So actual rates that the institution does not disclose. So is it that the rate is not disclosed or the information is not disclosed? That's where Josh, that's where I'm struggling in concert with the sub B. And I appreciate your clarification, but I need some help on understanding what's intended by that. And I'm not sure the language gets to what you've stated, Josh. So as I read it, is it the rate we're not disclosing or the fact that the rate is calculated based on what's listed below that becomes the issue?
Michael. You're on mute, Michael.
That's right. I mean, I think that the construction of the language here is that the issue is that the rate is inflated by using these means. That any use of these means, by definition, inflates the rate. You can't qualify that away.
Yeah, I think that wasn't intentional. I think we're talking about the inflation of the rate. That does not disclose me. Doesn't add anything.
Thank you all. Jennifer, at this stage, do you want to continue to proceed?
Yes. We're moving on to continuing on that same document, a new 66875 fact. And so we were just interested in your feedback. This is just an example of what we're considering and where we're considering placing it. I believe some of this was at least a result of our back and forth with state AGs, and draws elements, terms from New Jersey's Consumer Fraud Act, including concealment, suppression, or absence of material information. Except that subpart C is drawn from language already in the federal regulations concerning misrepresentation. So we are seeking feedback on the appropriateness of this language and are open to feedback and alternate suggestions for the best ways to define omissions. Let me just read it again real quickly. An omission of fact includes the knowing concealment, suppression, or absence of material information or statement with likelihood that others rely upon such concealment, suppression, or absence in connection with the nature of the institution's educational programs, financial charges, or the employability of the institution's graduates. An omission of fact includes, but is not limited to, the knowing concealment, suppression, or absence of material information or statement concerning the entity that is actually providing the educational instruction, B, the availability of slots or requirements for obtaining admission in a program where the institution places students in a pre-program at the time of enrollment, C, factors that would prevent an applicant for reasons such as prior criminal records or pre-existing medical conditions from qualifying to meet requirements that are generally needed to be employed in the field for which the training is provided. D, the nature of the institution's educational programs, institution's financial charges, or the employability of the institution's graduates.
Great, Joe.
So I want to make one point, and then I'd like my alternate actually to weigh in here as well. I'm concerned by the term knowing. I think it's very difficult to prove a school's state of mind on an omission, and that's not a part of that's not under Illinois Consumer Fraud Act. That's not required, and so I think any student is not going to be in a position to prove what the school knew or didn't know. And I think even from a law enforcement perspective, we don't normally have to prove that. So it would be a higher standard than we are currently held to by our state laws. That being said, you mentioned New Jersey, so I want to refer to my colleague from New Jersey to the extent that he knows whether that would be an element in his state.
Okay, Eric, if you could come on camera. There you are.
Thanks, Joe. So I would have to go back to some of my colleagues and ask whether they've had experience interpreting the term knowing. I don't want to speak out of turn here.
Looks like there are no other comments at this stage, Jennifer.
Yeah, I think, and then the last part is just the severability piece. So unless there are any other comments, we can maybe take it. I see Heather.
Heather, please proceed.
And this may be a question for Jennifer. I'm trying to gain a sense for the interconnectedness of what is here with institutional information that's required under 66843 or 66845. So I'm just trying to understand if there is a mapping, certain information is required by institutions. Is the misrepresentation and omission intended to be reflective at all of what institutions are required to provide for enrolled and prospective students under those other regulations?
Right, so remember that, yes, and the answer is yes. This is from this under general provisions. So this is not under the BD regulatory section. We are just cross-referencing it for consistency's sake. So this is under general provisions. Because we have an existing definition, we want to make sure that we can, you know, just as opposed to proposing or being redundant in the effort to streamline, we're just going to cross-reference what already exists. And we've provided more other examples to the non-exhaustive list.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to flag that I'm going to drop some alternative language into the chat on this. I think, you know, we're generally supportive of what the department's trying to do here, but harbor some of the same concerns that Joe mentioned with regard to the word knowing and reliance, generally speaking. And we'd like to see some additional categories included here, you know, to address things like omissions of fact with regard to the academic experience and instruction, who's providing that at the institution, specifically with regard to ineligible third parties, how academic terms are initiated in instances where a student isn't notified, or they may be, you know, enrolled in a term without their express consent or knowledge. And then similarly with regard to the structuring of programs and the student not having affirmative information with regard to how those programs are structured or bundled or stacked. So I'll drop that language in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. So at this stage, you know, Jennifer, unless you would like any other guidance, let's take a temperature check for tentative agreement on the red line text that's currently in front of you. Now, so give me, please provide your thumbs, and please be ready if you are, you know, if you haven't spoken up and if you have a serious reservation to speak up. Oh, you're cutting me off, Joe and Daniel. Go ahead, Joe and Daniel, and then we'll see if we can do a temp check after your comments.
There's a lot that we just went through, and I don't feel like I'm in a position to temp check all that, right? That's like, and I understand that this is kind of the standard thing, but like, I mean, in terms of we're dealing with a lot, but I don't know that I can temp check everything we just went through up to this point this morning in one go.
Fair enough. That was a lot. Daniel, is the same comments?
Well, sort of. I guess I'm asking, I wanted to ask, is it specifically the misrepresentation section? Because we started on the much larger section. So I'm just trying to understand what it is we're temp checking. Are we temp checking the misrepresentation section or the language that also is included in the general overarching language in the reg text pages 1 through 5 that we've already discussed? So I'm comfortable taking a temp check on the misrepresentation section. I want to understand what it is we're temp checking.
Yeah, well, I actually appreciate, I mean, Jennifer, if you have another way that you'd like some feedback, please suggest it. But, you know, for example, Suzanne in the chat has, you know, suggested by section, we could do that. But Jennifer, you have another suggestion? Yeah,
I would just, if it's helpful to break it up, like we've gotten to the federal standard, you know, the 5 bases that constitute a federal standard in the general BD regulations. If we could do a temp check to where we are for that, and then another temp check on misrepresentation. I realize there's a lot of misrepresentation. And I don't know if that's what Joe's concerned about, but it's just a temperature check just to see generally how people are feeling up to this point on those issues. So 2 different temperature checks. One, where we are generally, we talked about the structure of the BD regs, the applicability of the BD regs, and what the 5 bases for a claim. And so that's one. And then temperature check on the definition of misrepresentation.
And again, I'm sorry, but one of the 5 representations is aggressive recruitment. I know we have yet to discuss that. So again, in theory, I could vote, but until we have the particular conversation, it's going to be hard.
Are you referring to the proposal that's been made by committee members, not the department?
And,
or
the department's proposal, there's a separate document from the department on what constitutes aggressive recruitment. And then there was a counter proposal made as well.
You're right. We can add. So would it be better, because we're just going to get into the aggressive recruitment, just that discussion is more, more of a, I guess, less refined. So if we could take it, how about a temperature check on misrep, and then we can move into the aggressive recruitment discussion if people are comfortable with that.
Is everyone clear on what the temp check is on at this stage? You can say no if you're not. Okay. So let's take a temp check for tentative agreement on the misrepresentation section. Let me see thumbs, please. All right, I know a number of you have raised a number of points during our conversation. If there are any additional points you haven't raised, please do so. I can't tell if there are any thumbs down for folks that did not speak during this section. If you haven't spoken, please share your serious reservation. Jessica, go ahead.
I've spoken, but I just want to be clear because I've been thinking about the conversation that's been going on. I just think that the department should have to determine that there was a reliance upon the misrepresentation and the student was harmed or the borrower was harmed. So that's why I voted no.
Joe?
It's possible that I could be a sideways on this, but I have a 3 p.m. Central Time call with my constituency where this is going to be covered. And so I don't want to give the department the false sense that, we're all behind this before I get feedback from, I've got 50 other members that I should, because this is so central to kind of what we do. I want to get that feedback before I give the thumbs up. So that's the only addition I have.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, I could likewise very easily be a sideways, and maybe if you'd asked me 5 minutes later, I would have been a sideways. The big concern I have is I need to, there was some really important, as it is now written, and I'm not clear as to which points the department has agreed with us on. And until I have clarification on those points, I can't really be a yes. But I'm, very close to it.
Just to follow up with that, David, you broke up a little bit. If you could speak more specifically about, I'm sorry, what you broke up. So what points were keeping you from sideways? Exactly.
Yeah, it's mainly around the language regarding the disclosure and misrepresentation. Are the items there things that cannot be used in the calculation, for example, of a job placement rate, or are they items that must be disclosed if they are being included in the job placement rate? That's a huge difference, or any of the misrepresentation, and so clarification on that. Is the department, what's the department's intent? That never became clear to me.
Is that the same concern with the accrediting agency constituency?
You're on mute, Heather.
For asking about accrediting agencies, I was agreeing, yes, with David. I think until we can see the language and process how that would be implemented, it's hard to give a thumb sideways even right now.
Right, but we're talking specifically about the employability of graduate section, the placement rates.
And I think also some of the conceptual language that Daniel was referencing, once that gets clarified, I think it would be helpful for us to see it rewritten as well.
Well, at this stage, just before we move on, Greg, you have a comment, please.
Yeah, real quick, and we were thumbed sideways, but I was just wondering how we could even prove, and I think Josh mentioned this, state AGs mentioned this earlier, how we could even prove reliance, or how the Department of Ed could prove that. And I feel like if that is a prohibitor, I would just caution to maybe develop how could we even, as students, now we're talking about students, not legal experts, but students, how could we prove that an institution, knowing or whatever the case may be? Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Jennifer, before we move on, seeing as there are other hands up, does the department, would the department like any other guidance from the committee before we move on?
No, I think this is helpful. We'll move on. We can move on to the document, the third document, Vanessa. This is the one that says draft bar defense to repayment language. There's it's a separate document, and this will help us talk about aggressive recruitment. Great, thank you. So this is a document we've kind of collated suggestions from state AGs, some 2016 language, BD language, and language from the CFPB. Let's put a, I wanted to jump down to, we'll talk the violation of state law. Actually, Joe, if you're on, can you talk about this piece on the violation of state law? This is what your constituents have provided, and then we can go into aggressive recruitment.
Yeah, sure. You know, our concern here was with consideration of state law claims and not wanting to create additional burdens for students who wanted to have a state law claim considered. We also heard the department on you know, the administrative burden of considering state law in all instances, and so we tried to come up with a compromise here. And so we pulled language from the 2016 rule. That's the language in red. And I should note that we had feedback and actual help drafting from the legal services community. So kudos to Josh and Persis' colleagues at the National Consumer Law Center for their work on this. So we pulled the language from the 2016 rule that's in red. Then we tried to create this compromise between the department's original proposal, which was that you'd have to appeal and bring your state law claim separately after denial. And so if you look at section A, section A has a requirement that the state law be alleged in the application. And it gives the department the discretion to look at the state law piece prior to the federal piece, should they choose to do so. And then in B, we have a component that allows the department to, should the department choose to do so, they could consider it without the allegation. Bottom line here, we're trying to bridge a gap that would reduce a burden on students, but also not place an unadministrable burden on the department. That's the goal. Happy to take questions if I can clarify further.
Actually, I put you on the spot and I asked you to talk about this. If we could put a pin on this piece, I did want you to present it so that folks can kind of sit with it. We're going to talk about this proposal and, the state review generally when we get into the adjudication. If we could put a pin on that discussion and then continue with aggressive recruitment. But thank you for that, Joe. And again, this continues with language that the state AGs have put forward. And that is, I can read that out loud. Aggressive recruitment means exerting unreasonable pressure upon a consumer to enroll in an institution without limiting the general application of foregoing. The following conduct is a violation of this section. And again, and Joe, you can jump in here as well, because I realized you provided this. These are all different citations where some of these subsections come from. But just to give a quick review, exploiting a consumer's fears, anxieties, insecurities, or any specific misfortune or circumstances of such gravity as to impair the consumer's judgment, to influence the consumer's decision with regard to the institution. B, interfering with the ability of a consumer to understand a term or condition of enrollment or a financial product or service related to enrollment. C, taking unreasonable advantage of someone's lack of understanding of higher education and financial aid by reason of socioeconomic background, lack of familial experience in higher education or other reason. We've heard a lot about that throughout this discussion, session 1. D, taking unreasonable advantage of someone who reasonably relies on the recruiting individual or entity to act in their interest. Reasonable reliance shall be presumed if the recruiting individual uses a title that implies they're acting in the best interest of the student, including but not limited to admissions, rep, guidance counselor, academic advisor. E, unsolicited contact with a borrower that has previously requested not to be contacted. F, the use of threatening or abusive language or behavior. And G, exerting unreasonable or unsubstantiated time pressures upon a consumer. And just to go back to the issue of reliance, I just wanted to loop back to Greg and I think Jessica. Remember, we're inferring reliance if a reasonable person could have relied upon it. And let's pause there and see if there's any questions or concerns about that. Everything under aggressive recruitment in that first paragraph.
Daniel.
Oh, thank you, Emil. So first of all, I note that this is one of, I think, 3 options that are listed from the department or captured in this document. And then a group of us provided a 4th definition and concept for discussion as well. I do have, so first of all, I want to be very clear. None of these things are good and appropriate. And so I have reasonable agreement with this definition in terms of the the fact that all of these are bad actors and bad actions. I have a concern, though, about the subjective nature versus objectivity and reliance on objective statistics for some of these. So, for example, I'm not sure how one would demonstrate the exploiting of a consumer's fears or the interfering with the ability to understand a term. So I'm looking for some help with some of that. And again, others of this piece are very objective. So the use of threatening or abusive language is objective and can be documented. But the subjectivity concerns me on some of these. And while I understand the intent and support the intent, I wonder if there's another way to get to this without it being a subjective piece. So, if we're in a meeting, I could be accused of exploiting your fears or anxieties without knowledge. So that's really, I think, the objective. And I would suggest, again, I know we're not there yet, Jennifer, but let's, if we can also look at the group of proposals that that some of us put forward as part of this conversation. We've tried to be objective in our assessment.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. And yes, let's revisit some of the language that you put forward, you and others put forward. And the point is well taken. I mean, we have the same concerns here, so we are open to. These are the concepts that we're trying to get at. What does that look like in terms of when you're adjudicating these claims? And I think getting to language that is measurable in terms of what this results in. I think we would appreciate any feedback or proposals or proposed reg language on those issues.
We have a number of hands up. And I am curious as to whether the hands have to do with this specific option or if it's another option. So just if your comment is going to be regarding another option that we haven't gone over yet, just please be clear about that. Okay, David.
Yeah, in all of these items, one of the concerns that I have and my constituency is whether these can be written to apply to agents of a college. So we see increasingly that nonprofit and public institutions are contracting with external for-profit firms for their recruitment, admissions, enrollment management services. Often their contracts are written in such a way that they try to provide themselves protection against such regulations and laws. And so we would want misrepresentation, aggressive recruitment, and other rules that we write to apply to the institutions or the agents of the institutions. And so I see Joe. Yep. Thank you, Joe. So that hopefully it sounds like is in the language that we worked with Joe on. But something to keep in mind for all of the rules that we're considering is when do we want them to apply to other entities contracted acting on behalf of the institution, because that's a growing problem.
Thanks, David. Greg.
Yeah, quickly, I just wanted to, first of all, appreciate financial aid for the comments, but I think again, I think when you come, I think context matters, and when you're talking about individuals from low-income communities, from people of color, or even our veterans, I think that some institutions know how to play on some of the fears that the future isn't possible without a college education from this particular institution, or that there are different ways by which institutions use context to try to almost suggest that without this collegiate experience, there is no hope type of thing. And so I think that is something that is relatively easy to approve. And I think that while it would be a challenge maybe towards institutions, I understand your object and subject conversation or comment, but I think that this is one that happens all the time, and certainly I think a lot of students have an experience whereby they were contacted by a recruiter, contacted by someone who essentially told them that this institution is the only institution and there's no other way to go about success. And that's not necessarily true at all, particularly those within the context of the one I come from, right? Low income, colored community.
Right, Joe.
Yeah, so I want to push back on the idea that this standard is somehow subjective and can never be proved, because that's just not the case. This was common practice in the industry, the for-profit school industry, for a long time. We have investigations where we have training manuals that talk about things like the pain funnel, right? This is a term that a lot of us on the call today have heard, that exploit the borrower's pain funnel. And this is the type of thing that Craig's talking about. Schools would train their recruiters to specifically get the person talking about their hopes and goals and dreams. And then they would push the person to enroll by saying, well, don't you want to provide a better life for your family? Don't you want to do this? Don't you want to do that? You can do it. Just sign up with us today, right? So this is well-established activity. It can be proven through internal documents from the company. It can be proven through call recordings. I've listened to a lot of recruiting phone calls in my 8 years at the Attorney General's office, and they're the type of things that make you blush when you hear the stuff that recruiters tell students in order to get them to enroll. And so this standard here, we have to get at this conduct. This is what aggressive recruitment has looked like for the last 10 years. Happy to talk about tweaking the language, but am 100% against removing it because it's too subjective or anything along those lines.
Jerry.
I'm going to agree both with Joe and with what Greg was saying. It's consistent phone calls. It's, blowing up emails, which is one of the reasons students don't answer their emails. They get blown up with all of these, time's running out. You're not going to be able to have the future you want unless you go through us. I don't think it's hard to prove at all. And it's, I think it's necessary language to make sure that our students are protected in these cases.
Justin.
Yeah, thank you. Just want to say that I think, broadly speaking, we're generally supportive of this particular approach to aggressive recruitment. We'd be supportive of it actually being strengthened further to include some additional instances or categories of things that would satisfy or qualify as aggressive recruitment. We'd also be supportive of it being strengthened further. And I think there's some indication that that's in the works with regard to third parties. That is not a novel idea. There are examples of that very thing, both within DoD and in more recent policy focused on the Department of Veterans Affairs. So I just wanted to express general support and support for it being strengthened further, especially in both of those areas. Thank you.
Heather.
Great, thank you. And thank you to Joe for offering to tweak some of the language, because I know I was a part of some of the discussions with Daniel in this smaller group. And I think that we were looking at some of the more specific areas that made it clear what the behaviors were to those that may not have the years of experience that you all have seeing the behavior. So I certainly wanted to express appreciation for that. I also wanted to speak to David and Justin's comments from the accreditor perspective in terms of the contracts that may exist with institutions or what we may call as third-party providers. Certainly there's an increased reliance on that by institutions, and accreditors do hold institutions responsible for any activities or actions under their name. And so for us, we do have requirements for institutions relating to those arrangements, and where they are problematic, we can certainly pursue non-compliance actions against the institution. So I did want to offer some support for that as well. And I did note that in the chat, Michael placed a comment there as well about his agency, that they require recruitment to be done by institutional employees. So we do see some activities from the accrediting perspective that I think lend well here.
All right, thank you. I do want to note that new language has just been circulated via email, so please take a look at that. Noelia.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to make sure that we differentiate between some of the aggressive practices we're talking about and what maybe some of the publics and nonprofit campuses are doing, specifically the marketing and outreach to students around the May 1 national intent to enroll deadline. There are a lot of emails that go out to students during that May 1 or just prior, leading up to it, to ensure that students don't miss that specific very important deadline, because if they're not committing by that May 1 date, they may not come attend that campus after that. So I do want to differentiate some of these email blasts that go out from the nonprofits and the public institutions to ensure that students aren't missing vital deadlines.
David.
Yeah, thank you, Noelle. That was something that Joe and I and others discussed via email and comments to the document quite a bit, because recruitment can be a very good thing. And for particularly students who don't think they are college material, to be recruited wakes them up. They see more options. And so we don't want to restrict helpful recruitment that is reasonable, that helps keep campuses alive, that helps students see their options. And so we actually did cut some language in order to allow for that. If there is more that needs to be done, I think we should, because we do want students to be recruited. We want them getting mailers and emails. It can get annoying as a parent for 2 students who went through the college process, but at the same time, my kids were so flattered, you know, it was kind of cool to be wanted. So absolutely.
David, Jessica.
I just wanted to support what Noelia and David were saying. I just want to add a comment. I started my career as a graphic designer and then moved into higher ed. So I've been working in marketing for a long time. And when I think about what we used to do 20 years ago to let even students know about an open house, you know, we used to send them an invitation and maybe follow up with some phone calls to get their RSVP. But because now there are so many different communication channels and not all students pay attention to the same channels. You know, I look at our marketing campaigns now and they're so much more complicated because we're having to send emails and texts, and we're still calling and sending direct mail, and we're also doing some social campaigns just because we're trying to reach the students, you know. And I know everybody's recruiting students for different reasons. You know, it could be because in my case, their artistic talent might be academic or athletic talents. So yes, I agree with what's been said, that we don't want to stifle that because that helps students make good decisions.
Thank you. Jerry.
Okay, I understand all that, but that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about can you please come to my school? Here's my catalog. We're talking about predatory, the pain funnel. If you've never lived in the pain funnel is real. It's It's not about general admissions that, you go to a college fair. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who are targeted because of their economic status, because they're first gen, because of that. They're targeted for a reason to get money that then students can't pay back. So I just want to make sure we're really clear on the student aspect of this. This happens all of the time. And it's not we mean well and we want you to do well because you're not represented. There's a way to recruit people who are underrepresented, who don't know the process, and doing it through a pain funnel. I love that phrase. It'll be on a hat at some point, because that is the truest thing about what we're actually talking about here, is really what individuals are going through. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. And I see Dixie is at the table for dependent students now. Please proceed, Dixie.
Yeah, so I really wanted to kind of push back a little bit on what folks were saying, and especially as a CSU student. So I attend Cal State Fullerton, which is housed within the largest four-year public university system in the nation, the Cal State University system, which is where Noelia's from as well. So, hey, but I do recognize, and also there is importance, right, to hey, May 1st deadline is coming up, right? That was particularly helpful for me. But the difference here is that students are being preyed upon on our inexperience and not having, right, the knowledge that we really need to differentiate, oh, this campus or this university system is reminder, right? When I was a senior, could not really differentiate May 1st deadline with, hey, we're going to aggressively recruit you to our campus because you're a first-gen Latina, right? You're the first person in your family to graduate high school, which was the case for me, right? Even despite having an older sibling, I was the first to graduate from high school, and I went to a poor high school filled with brown students, and I'm a brown student myself. So of course I'm gonna be aggressively recruited. And so I want to push back on that idea that well, these public institutions, right, whatever, these institutions are doing it from the good of their heart, and right, there is a difference, yes, but also the majority of these recruiting tactics are aggressive. And so we need to, yes, that reminder email is helpful, but the difference in that and getting phone calls all the time to come to an event and this and that and this and that every couple of weeks, that is aggressive. That is aggressive, and it's tiring, and it's emotionally and mentally, and at some point for me, physically taxing, right? To be someone trying to navigate an entire educational system, not knowing. And so I think a lot of what the points made here lacked a lot of perspective from students. And specifically, I shared my perspective and my experience as a first-gen Latina student being aggressively recruited the first session. And so I wanted to bring that experience back, because the reminders are helpful, May 1st deadline, right? That's different than getting phone calls from an institution consistently every week or every 2 weeks on the clock, on the hour, right? That's different. And I wish I could submit, right, to the entire committee. Thank you. I wish I could submit phone call records from institutions that I would calls that I would be getting every week to attend things that weren't even pertinent to my degree pathway or what I was interested in, right? And so, right, we're being exploited. And so there is a difference between a reminder than what we're talking about here. And that's what the perspective and the point of views that were shared, that it lacked that perspective from a student that was aggressively recruited based on their identities.
We're at time.
Thanks, Dixie. Joe.
Just very briefly, the definition of aggressive recruiting that we're looking at here, we specifically excluded stuff that would have implicated what Noelia was talking about or what Jessica was talking about. The only thing that would apply is unsolicited contact with a borrower that has previously requested not to be contacted. right? So there's nothing in here that puts a bar on schools talking about May 1st or other substantiated time concerns. So we really did try to, be thoughtful in protecting students, but also allowing institutions to communicate with people that want to be communicated with.
Joe, Daniel.
Yeah, sorry, trying to find the mute and open up Word and everything at the same time. Sorry about that. Joe, if you can, and this is really helpful. Let me back up. First of all, Dixie, Greg, and others, I appreciate the voice you're raising. And again, my concern is that I want to make sure that the way the regulations are written, that we're not catching the good actors with the bad. Jerry, I have exception to the pain funnel as well. I think that is ridiculous and exploitative. And I just want to be very clear, right? My concern all along has been, though, that we not be so broad as to catch the good actors with the bad actors. And so I'll go back to where I started, which is, I'm looking for something objective, something that says this is the behavior that cannot be done. And I get that, Joe, to your point earlier, these may fall under objective standards, but as written, exploiting a consumer's fears as an example, right? Documented how. So is there a way for us to show or talk about how that could be documented so that, again, we don't, by casting a wide net, I want to be careful because I want to cast a net wide enough to catch the examples that you've given. But by the same token, I don't want to cast it so wide that we snare institutions that aren't in place. And I'll use a point of view that has been shared before. This is going to depend on the administration, I think, in place at the time. I want to be careful that different administrations don't take a different view on this. To the students' credit, I want to be careful that we're protecting and careful about student perspective. So I want to cast the net wide enough, but also not cast it so wide. And so, I'd look for some help. I also would like us. We spent a lot of time on this first definition. I'd like us to look at some of the others because I think there may be pieces that we can pull and reflect in to those pieces.
Thank you. I see we have a few comments. We have about 5 minutes left in the morning session. I don't want to prematurely cut off the discussion. It would be nice before the lunch hour to take some kind of temp check, given that there has been a lot of discussion and I don't want it to be lost. If that's not appropriate, that's fine, but that's just as facilitator something I'm thinking about doing. Josh. Oh, Jennifer, go ahead.
I was just wanted to, we might need to take that temp check after lunch because we still, so yeah, but this is all good. It sounds like in general, people feel positively about the inclusion of this concept. So I feel good about this discussion.
So I'll ask when we go to lunch, keep the conversation fresh in your head so when we get back to it, we can pick up from where we left off. Josh.
Thanks. So we're very supportive of, in particular, the new proposal that Joe just circulated. I do have concerns, though, to Daniel, your comments. I understand, I totally get that we want to distinguish between good actors acting appropriately and unfair and deceptive conduct. My concern is that if we get too specific in what we're listing out, we've seen schools, particularly in the for-profit industry, find new ways to exploit people and take advantage of people. And if we're not, if we're not broad enough in our language, we're going to end up creating a situation where these schools will just find new ways to take advantage of people. So, for example, one school that has just been subject to a class action lawsuit a former teacher testified in an affidavit that on smoke breaks, admissions officers would bring unhoused individuals into the office and get them to exploit their financial situation and get them to sign up for their school. I don't think we need to list that specifically in the regs, but it needs to be covered with whatever we end up with. And I think the language that Joe just circulate would capture that and does a nice job of distinguishing between what we're trying to get after here.
Thank you. I do want to note that Emily is at the table for Veterans and Military Group. Joe. Joe, where did you go?
Sorry, I'm here. I lowered my hand after you commented. Two very quick things.
One, go ahead. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Two very quick things. One, the department asked for sites as to where we got these concepts, and so this is included in what you see here. Moving down from the first one, many of these are pulled from the Dodd-Frank Consumer Financial Protection Act. One of the reasons that we did that is because there are concepts in that law that are flexible in ways that Josh talked about. It's an established federal standard, which should appeal to the department here. And then if you look at B and C, these are concepts that are pulled directly from federal law and that we saw as directly applicable to schools' conduct in lawsuits and investigations that we've been involved with. So we are trying to get definable standards here, to Daniel's point. We don't want something that isn't grounded in fact and law. So second thing, I'm sorry for distributing the second version of aggressive recruitment right as we're talking about it, but I got a lot of feedback from negotiators from my constituency. And so although the timing isn't the best, it was my best effort to consolidate everything I got and get it out there for the group to consider. Thank you.
Excellent. So I see David and Emily have their hands up. We are at lunchtime, so David and Emily, you will be the first two to go when we resume the conversation, okay? Excellent. Well, with that, we are at 12 o'clock Eastern. We'll take a 1-hour lunch. Thank you for the hard work of the committee this morning. Look forward to continuing the discussion this afternoon.